So hey, I'm Seren. I'm also dyslexic, and I want to talk to you about icon fonts and the reasons why me and many others have issues with them. I'm studying software engineering at Oxford Brookes, and I'm currently on my industrial placement at a company called Incuna. My dyslexia affects me in a number of different ways. Firstly, I can find it hard to read and often mistake words. I can also find it hard to keep track of where I am, and I often have to use my hand or cursor to guide myself along. Reading can take me a long time for these reasons, and I often feel like I have to reread things a few times to make sure that I've read the right thing or that I'm in the right part of the text. Structure can be difficult too, and at school I found essays really hard and knowing where the right bit should go. According to the NHS, 1 in 10 people in the UK suffer from dyslexia. This will cover a wide range of people, such as those who have really severe dyslexia, all the way across the spectrum to those who suffer it quite minorly. But dyslexia is very broad and affects a number of people in many different ways. And while I may experience misreading words and letters, other people with dyslexia may not experience this at all. So, for my A-levels, I managed to write this in a piece of coursework. Of course, what I meant to write was this. The worst part about this is my A-level teachers now know me as Flatulent Clowns Girl. So here's a Christmas present from my lovely parents. What's even funnier is, it took me days to realize that that doesn't say calm. This type of thing happens to me an awful lot. And I can quite often find myself reading things on the internet, such as, when life gives you melons, you may be dyslexic. It took me all day and Skyping my parents to realize that the saying is, if life gives you lemons. Technology is amazing, and I see it as my helping hand. It guides and aids me through my experiences. For example, I convert PDFs, such as journals and articles, to spoken tracks on iTunes. This means I can listen to it and read it at the same time, and it helps me not get lost in the words or not really know where I am. I also highlight text on the internet and right-click on my Mac and get it to read to me. This isn't saved, but it means I can read things that iTunes can't convert. However, I can't always have my Mac read to me. Sometimes I need to do some real work, like uni work. For this, I use a special font that's designed for dyslexics. The one I'm showing you here is Open Dyslexic, but there are many others out there. Another one I've used is Gill Dyslexic. I use a font that is weighted. As you can see, the bottom line is significantly heavier than the top. Now, there is a number of reasons why this is, but one is so that when you have blocks of text, the lines don't blur all into one and you can't tell where one line is compared to the other. Another reason why this is the way it is so that if users experience letters flipping, so appearing upside down, like you can see here, they can tell that they're seeing the letter upside down, as suddenly the top part of the word is heavier rather than the bottom. Another reason why these fonts are quite good is that each character is a lot more defined, and it's clearer to see which letter is which. As you can see, Gill Sans is particularly bad when it comes to L, 1, and I. They all look the same, they're just a straight line. But Open Dyslexic, each of these characters is a lot more defined. Like, we can clearly see which one of those is an L. Also, with Helvetica, you can see that D, P, B, and Q are all just the same character. They've just been flipped or mirrored or just moved a bit. Whereas in Open Dyslexic, each of these characters has a lot more of is defined more subtly. For example, the D has a small tail, unlike the B. So that if it is flipped, or you're not sure what you're reading, you can still tell. I push my dyslexic fonts to web pages to make it easier for me to read. I like using a Google extension called Font Changer. I prefer this one over some others out there because it allows me to upload my own custom font. So it means I can use Open Dyslexic, or if maybe one day I don't really want to use that font, I can use Gill Dyslexic. As you can see, I've changed the style of the website, but it's all fully functional. I can still click on all of the links and use Wikipedia how anybody else in this room would. The one big difference is, on this site, I can read the content a lot easier. But all too often, I see this, a lovely little box. Where I push my dyslexic font to the web page, I break icon fonts and subsequently get this box. This is because there is no equivalent glyph, so it doesn't really know what to do with it. So let's pick on the old-ish GitHub site as our example. This is what the site does look like, and what most of you here will see. But this is what I used to experience. As you can see, there are a lot of boxes. They're everywhere. So on one hand, I've made GitHub easier for me to read. I can see all the content a lot clearer. But I don't have much context of what's going on. I don't know where the links are going to take me. As all I have is this box to go off. As you can see on this left-hand side, where you'd normally see if someone's made a pull request or starred something, I don't get any of that anymore through a visual representation. I have to read each line, which isn't always the easiest. I can't even tell that this is GitHub site because their logo's gone. I have to look at the URL. When we look at the top section here, all I see is 2 boxes, and to find out their meaning, I have to scroll over them. I shouldn't have to do this. Their purpose should be clear. But we can argue that to a user who doesn't change the style of our websites, that they are. This will never be a problem for most of you in this room, but for me and many others, it is. So, are some users hidden to us? We don't think about people changing the style of our sites to make it easier for them to use, such as the font. And then, are there users that we just don't understand their needs fully? Such as screen reader users. I'm going to be talking about 2 types of users who may use a screen reader. We get those with a visual impairment who may need a screen reader to be able to use the technology and just to guide them through it. And then we get users like me who use a screen reader to help them with words and read out the text because they're not very good at it. So, how would a screen reader read this? In this example, we have a star icon next to the word favorite. These are 3 ways a screen reader might deal with our icon fonts. Some screen readers will simply skip the icon and read the text either side. Now, this is the best possible outcome, as you will soon see. But what if there's no words to explain it either side? Like with GitHub earlier, you can't even tell that it's a GitHub site because the logo's gone. Now we can see the screen reader is reading aloud as black star favorite or star favorite. Now this is far from ideal. We're giving users a false representation of what's on the screen. They could think this black star is a word rather than an icon. The Filament group did some research and found that VoiceOver on Mac OS X read out icon fonts, and this is still the case for iPads. Lastly, screen readers read out icons as unpronounceable. Now, this is far from ideal and possibly the worst thing they could do. How will a user know if that's an icon, a long, complicated word their screen reader doesn't understand, or some acronym as well that screen reader doesn't understand? They have no idea what's going on. Here's a great resource, Unify by John Holt Ripley. He's tested a number of icons with screen readers and recorded their results, so that us devs can see how screen readers may interpret our icon fonts. I highly recommend this site, and John's even gone as far as to test devices and browsers and see how they interact and deal with icon fonts too. Are we just forgetting some people? There's also another section of people who are affected by icon fonts. Opera Mini doesn't support icon fonts. And just today, Bruce Lawson stated that Opera Mini now has around 2.8 million users worldwide.
290 million.
Yep. As you can see, the numbers are really large, and Opera Mini isn't going anywhere any day soon. In this example, I'm showing you Bootstrap on the components page, and there are a lot of boxes. A while ago on Twitter, Bruce said, we don't download fonts. Icons are what SVG is for. We can see that Opera Mini has no plans to change and to support icon fonts. They view them as a nice to have, they're not a necessity. They don't provide content, they're more of a decorative thing. Opera Mini is currently aiming itself at emerging markets such as Asia and India, the places where your next lot of customers are coming from. These places have poor internet speeds, but Opera believes should experience the web how the rest of us do on a fast internet connection. So, this is me quoting Bruce quoting me, although I didn't know this when I originally wrote this talk. Bruce and the devs at Opera acknowledge dyslexic users such as myself, who change their browser fonts and realize that icon fonts just don't work for everyone, for reasons I've previously pointed out. Opera Mini isn't the only browser not to support icon fonts. There are others out there too. And then there's you guys, mobile device users. So sometimes things don't go how you expect them to. Etsy found that on some mobile devices, 4.5-star reviews were showing as 4 stars and a horse. iOS couldn't find the glyph in the file, so it substituted 0.5 star for a horse. And here's the bug report for 4 stars and a horse. This is all down to the private use area. So the private use area is an area of the font file where standard characters won't be because they're reserved for the private use. This can be a bit of a free-for-all and lead to unpredicted results, as we've just seen. The private use area is mainly used to avoid overwriting existing glyphs. And this means phones can use the private use area Unicode rather than what us devs might have stated it to be. This slide is stolen from Zach Leatherman from the CSS Conf 2014. Here, Zach explains icons in the private use area a lot better than I probably will. Here we have the Unicode on the far left and how each icon is displayed. So we can see the same Unicode can give us completely different outcomes on the same mobile browser, but on a different device. So here we can see that the Twitter icon, you expect to see the bird, on mobile Safari is actually a boy emoji. That's the complete different message to what you're trying to convey. If you wish to find out more about the private use area, I would highly recommend going and watching Zach's talk. He goes into a lot more detail about the app font face and other problems that icon fonts have. There's also another bunch of mobile device users who are affected. When Apple released iOS 9, they brought out the WebKit Content Block API. And this means ad blocks became a lot more easier to create, and thus becoming a lot more common and popular in the App Store. The API allows a number of things to be blocked on the user's request through an app. One of the elements a user can turn off or block, so to say, is web fonts, and this includes icon fonts. So, any iOS 9 ad block user who has turned off web fonts to increase the performance of their browsing won't see any of your icon fonts, and will have a similar experience to the users I've previously stated. The example here shows the Peace app, which was created by Marco Amoret. I'm really sorry, I think I butcher his name every time. He has since taken the app down and wrote a detailed blog post all about this, and I recommend going and reading it if you want to know more. But in this, he mentions 2 other similar apps called Purity and Crystal. So, I've spent 40-odd slides complaining about icon fonts. I suppose I should tell you some of their good sides and why we actually use them. They do everything a normal font can, which is pretty great when you think about it. They're scalable. They work great on Retina devices, and we need maybe one line of CSS to change their size. We can do it how we would any other font. They can be styled. All we need to do is change the CSS rather than opening up our photo in photo editing software and manually changing all the colors in it. To make pages load faster, we want to reduce the number of HTTP requests. And this is something that icon fonts are particularly good at. So, is there light at the end of the tunnel? Is there something better than icon fonts? Is there an alternative we could be using? Well, I think there is. SVG. SVG is pretty cool and the things you can do with it. SVG has lots of interesting features and nifty tricks that can help us create wonderful websites. I think SVG is the best alternative to icon fonts at this current moment in time. One of the biggest benefits SVG has is accessibility. SVG has two built-in tags which are great for this, the title and description. So here's an example of a rating star and the code underneath it that produced this icon. The content of the title and description tag elements are not rendered visible by default, although they can be styled to do so. We can also get these read aloud by your screen reader by using aria labeled by. They should also be exposed to the browser's accessibility API. To put it simply, the title element provides an alternative text description, and I like to think of it the same way as you would as the alt with pictures. The SVG description element is similar to the title element, although it allows you to provide a much more detailed description of its parent element. If you want to find out more about making accessible SVGs, I would highly recommend going and reading Tips for Creating Accessible SVGs by Leonie Watson. She's gone into a lot more detail and even discussed browsers and screen reader support for these elements. SVG is also scalable. We can zoom in really, really close, and it won't be some weird pixelated mess, and our users won't really know what's going on. They can see clear, crisp lines and work out what the picture is. This is great for users who magnify their screens to see maybe a few words at a time. SVG also allows for multicolor icons. I get far too excited about the idea of having all these colors in one icon, in comparison to icon fonts that can only be one color. This means we actually gain a lot more flexibility with what we can do with our icons. We also don't need these weird hacks of trying to layer multiple icon fonts over the top of each other to try and get the picture that you want. A cool side of SVG is you can animate them. They can flash, spin, and do lots of really cool, interesting things. So in this example, we have a hamburger menu moving to a circle with an X in it. We can do this with CSS or JavaScript. It just depends on the complexity of what you want to create. SVG looks great on Retina and other high-density devices, which is great in a world where we all want the next best device. And we want our websites to look good on them too, so that our users are having a good experience. It also means that if we get images that we know will look good on high-density devices, that there's less work for us to do when these new devices come out. SVGs are relatively easy to use. We can grab them from a library we already use, such as IcoMoon, or we can even convert our old icon fonts into SVGs. Firstly, we can use the image tag and add them to our site in the way we would add any other image. This means we can use the alt tag. However, when adding SVGs in this way, we need to include the role attribute. Otherwise, iOS will simply ignore it, and it won't be read aloud through your screen reader. Secondly, we can use the good old SVG tag itself. And this allows us to add our SVGs in line and gives us a lot more flexibility with what we can do with them. We can manipulate them with CSS and JavaScript, and all we need to do is add an ID to the bits that you want to animate or change color. So for example, at work, we have created this really big arrow that had different points on it, and when you clicked on it, different parts of the arrow would change color and gray out. And you can't do this with icon fonts. Icon systems. Icon systems are a great way to combine all of your SVGs into one place. We can do this manually by writing this all out by hand, or you can use a plugin such as SVG Store that will do this all for you. All you need to do is put your SVGs in one folder, and your grunt or gulp will create this magically. We simply add the SVGs into a symbol tag, which you can see here, and we use the ID, which we use later to call them. Because this is inline, we can still use the title and description tags that I mentioned earlier, and you can still create accessible SVGs. So to use the SVGs that you've just created in your icon system, we use the use tag and use the ID that we've given it before to call it. The use tag, however, won't work in Internet Explorer when you call it from an external file. So this is something to be aware of if you're trying to use them. There's also the CSS background method. We can use our SVGs to add decorative elements to our site. And we can treat these how you would with any other image. The difference is they'll scale beautifully, and we won't get some weird pixelated mess when you're trying to use the same SVG over multiple places in your site. So that was 3 or 4 easiest ways to use SVGs in my opinion, but lots of people have different opinions on what the best ways are to use them. Finally, I believe in the right way of doing things. Letting an image be an image, and not making something it's not a font. SVG can do a lot more than what I've mentioned, and if you want to find out more, I highly recommend going and watching Chris Coyer's talk, The Wonderful World of SVG, from last year's CSS Conf, or going and looking at any of Sarah Swayerdan's work. She knows everything there is to possibly know about SVG, and her blog posts and resources are really useful and informative for when you're trying to learn this type of thing. But SVG does have some downsides to it, like everything else. It's not supported in IE 8 and Android 2.3 and below. So if these browsers matter to you, you'll need a fallback solution. An example of this is the Filament Group's Grunticon. Grunticon generates fallback PNG images for your icons, and make sure that those are used in any browser that doesn't understand SVG. You won't see CSS or JavaScript enhancements applied to these images, but you'll get a static icon, which is often most crucial in the usability of your site. So, I recommend checking your analytics and seeing what devices and browsers your users are using to see if you need this fallback. Finally, Adi Osmani said on Twitter, icon fonts rendering performance is around 5 times faster than SVG at the moment. There's been lots of debate at the moment on SVG and icon fonts size, and they're definitely worth a read if you want to know more about this and get different people's perspectives. But this is something that I think will be fixed sooner rather than later, for example with SVG2, and as SVGs gain in popularity again. So, icon fonts versus SVGs, the big question. I've mocked up a fairly simple website, but with one big difference, how the icons were implemented. They look the same, minus a few styling issues on my behalf, but they'll act very differently given the situation they're put in. So, as you can see, I've gone and pushed my dyslexic font to the web page. The version on the left, this one, won't show properly, and the icons will display as these lovely squares. Whereas the SVG version will display the icon still. On both pages, the layout has been slightly broken due to the font itself, as it makes all the text larger and it messes with the spacing too to make it clearer and easier for people to read. But critically, the SVG stays, and it doesn't turn into some box. We have all of our icons still. I can see everything that the developers and designers intended me to, and I can use a site how anyone else would. So, remember GitHub from earlier? Well, they fixed it. They recently switched from icon fonts to SVGs. As you can see, GitHub doesn't break when I push my font to it anymore. I get the same experience as anyone else in this room. I can use GitHub normally again. I don't have to decide anymore if I want to be able to read the text more and understand what people are doing, or have a graphical representation of what's going on. I can have the best of both worlds. If you want to find out more about how and why GitHub changed from icon fonts to SVGs, I would highly recommend reading their blog post. It's really informative. They talk about why they made this decision and, in particular, how they went from having all icon fonts to all SVGs. The blog post touches on subjects such as accessibility and rendering time, and just lots of really useful stuff. Lastly, it's not exactly an alternative, but if you must use icon fonts, please use context. Here we can see a hamburger menu and menu written after it. If the icon font breaks, we can't see the hamburger menu, but we can still read menu. We can tell what its purpose is meant to be. Like, I know this is a menu compared to something else. Whereas here, if we just have the icon, people like me are clueless to what it's meant to be. For example, with GitHub earlier, I didn't even know that was GitHub's site until I went and looked at the URL. That could be anything. Likewise, if you run into an Etsy 4 stars and a horse situation, where your icon doesn't appear how you expect it to, I believe it's better having the text next to it rather than this. This is just a lipstick print icon. We can't tell the icon's purpose or what it's meant to be. Like, this could be a home button or a button to let you send kisses to your loved ones. Our users are clueless. So, having our icons and then the context next to it means that no matter what happens to our icons, our users still know what's going on, and they can navigate our sites and use them effectively. So, during the London Olympics opening ceremony, Tim Berners-Lee said, "The web is for everyone." So why aren't we building it that way? I know in creating something, we can't think of every single possible user out there, but I want us to think about other possibilities. What happens if a user changes the style of our site to make it easier for them to use, or if they view it in a way that we weren't expecting them to? We should be building the web for everyone, and I believe that's part of our jobs. Next time you use an icon font, I want you to think about your users. How do you know this man isn't dyslexic and changes the style of your site to make it easier for him to read? Or this woman, how do you know that she doesn't use a screen reader? Or this man, he may love using Opera Mini and think it's the best browser since sliced bread. Or lastly, this woman in her Vodafone top. She's a mobile user. How do you know that she's viewing her icons the way you expected her to? Or that she's not turning off web fonts completely so that she can have a faster browsing? In the words of accessibility expert Leonie Watson, code like you give a damn. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah?
Apart from dyslexic people, would people from other countries with other character sets like China or Arabia also have a similar problem with item clocks?
I was asked this earlier today, and I'm not 100% sure on the answer, but I think it would probably be yes, just because if you're completely changing the font, then most icon fonts start to freak out and disappear. But yeah. So yeah, I think they would have the same problem. Yeah. Is there anybody else? Yeah. Thank you.